Thanks for checking out Barkada DMV. Don't forget to subscribe for more films and content by Filipino-Americans for Pinoys everywhere. Maraming salamat! I went down to DC for a tour of Filipino history. The tour was organized by Regina Aquino, producer and director of Faith Healers, as a kickoff for the documentary's production. And it was led by Professor Erwin Tiongson. Professor Tiongson is an economist by trade, but started a project with his family more than 10 years ago to find Filipino historical sites in Washington, D.C. When they first started, they compiled a list of 30 historical sites. More than 10 years later, that list has grown to 250 sites. Our tour started at the consular section of the Embassy of the Philippines, which used to be the old embassy, and before that was the headquarters of the Commonwealth of the Philippines during World War II.
Up until 1898, the Philippines was a Spanish colony. And then the Spanish-American War started around spring. May 1, 1898 was the Battle of Manila Bay. And within hours, Admiral Dewey had defeated the Spanish Armada. And the US had become the newest superpower. Right? Fast forward to December 1898, the Treaty of Paris basically passed on the Philippines to the US in exchange for $20 million. And then it was a US colony for the next several decades. Okay. 1935, the US government created the Philippine Commonwealth government, and that was meant to be a 10-year transition to full independence. The way we think about it now, it's transition to the full recognition of Philippine independence, because the Philippines had actually declared independence in June 1898. Okay, so 1935, Philippine Commonwealth, transition to full Philippine independence. But 1941, as we all know, that's the Second World War, or the Pacific War. It's part of the Second World War. That's when it started, thus interrupting the 10-year transition. And it wasn't until July 4, 1946, when the Philippines finally became independent, or when its independence was finally fully recognized by the US. So in case you're wondering, this year, for example, the Philippine government has been saying it's the 125th year of Philippine independence, and you're wondering, wait, we were independent, it wasn't until 1946 when the Philippines became independent. It's because 125 years ago, the Philippines did declare independence. The US never recognized.
And the US just occupied.
Yes. Okay. So, but that explains why, for nearly 50 years, the Philippines was US territory.
Professor Tiongson provided some amazing information we had never heard about extraordinary Filipinos who had passed through Washington, D.C.
In the late 1980s, an important exhibit took place here, featuring the works of Galo Ocampo. So that name might not ring a bell, but he was an amazing 20th century figure. He was many things. He was a scholar, so he wrote books about Philippine art history and Philippine culture. He was a professor at the University of Santo Tomas. He was director of the National Museum, but he was also an artist, and he's best known for something he painted in the pre-war period. Now, remembering the context, Filipinos are mostly Catholics because of the Spanish colonial period. And imagine what it must have been like in the 1930s. Up until that point, Mary in Catholic iconography had always been portrayed as Western, as white, right? So Galo Ocampo thought, why is she white? Why can't she be Filipino? So he painted Mary as a Filipina. Can you imagine? Pre-war, 1930s, this is known as the Brown Madonna. And you can imagine how controversial it was at that point for Mary to be portrayed as someone who looked like us. Geographic magazine, and my family and I, we liked the magazine, but in the late 1890s, early 1900s, the magazine basically provided the intellectual justification for the colonization of the Philippines. So they published many articles that look like this. You're gonna hate this. Oof. And the idea was that the US was in the Philippines to civilize Filipinos.
Yeah, they gave Roosevelt all of the
That's the
ammunition.
same.
Yes.
We were savages. We are savages.
That's exactly the justification, right? Even McKinley, when he was asked why they were taking over the Philippines, he said, well, because we want to Christianize them, which
We were
was
Catholic
ridiculous.
already.
Exactly. That's his business card. And it's signed by him. If you look closely, it says, greetings of the season. So it would have been issued around this time in 1960. But think about how remarkable this business card is. Think about an ascendant political career. The future Philippine Commonwealth government president had just become the leader of the independence movement after spending several years here in the US, culminating in the Jones Act. The White House, and I could tell you stories about White House stewards from the Philippines, including this man, Irineo Esperancilla, who was born in Samar and moved to Washington, I think in his early 20s, and he served 4 US presidents, including Roosevelt, Truman, I think Hoover, Eisenhower. This photo was taken, I think, in the 1930s, and he was referred to as chef to the chief. He was Roosevelt's favorite chef. And if you read Roosevelt's biographies, you'll also see frequent references there to Mr. Esperancilla. And according to some of Roosevelt's biographies, he carried Roosevelt to his deathbed.
Professor Tiongson had what seemed like a magic backpack where he kept pulling out items, like an antique stereoscope and a Bluetooth speaker, which provided the most mind-blowing part of this tour. Professor Tiongson was trying to find a recording of Filipino poet Jorge Garcia Villa reading his own work. He went to the poet's family and others who were dedicated to preserving his work, and none of them had a recording or even knew of a recording. But through his contacts, he was able to track one down.
Anyway, so here it is. Jorge Garcia Villa.
First, a poem must be magical, then musical as a seagull. It must be a brightness moving and hold secret, a bird's flowering. It must be slender at the bell, and it must hold fire as well. It must have the wisdom of bows, and it must kneel like a rose. It must be able to hear the luminance of dawn and deer. It must be able to hide what it seeks like a bride. And overall, I would like to hover God smiling from the poem's cover.
That was an amazing tour. Kuya Erwin was so generous with his time and knowledge, and we learned so much.
By the way, I forgot to mention the reason why we were there, because after they inaugurated West Potomac Park, somebody thought